Well, today we're doing a standalone sermon on Transfiguration Sunday. What is Transfiguration Sunday? Well, if you don't know, you're going to hear about it today. And then next week we'll start our sermon series into our Lenten season all the way through Easter. But we're looking at, and the title of today's message is, It's Good to Be Here. Is that true in your lives? Do you think it is good to be here today? And I ask you as a pondering point to think about that very question. Where is it good to be anyway? Is it good at times to be at home? Do you ever go through a tough day? Maybe it's at work, something you're challenging, and you just walk through the doors of your home. Have you ever done this and be like, it's good to be home? Have you ever done that? Maybe it's you go on a vacation, and even though you had a good time away, isn't it something to walk through the doors of your house and like, it's good to be here? And there's a picture up there in the middle on the top is someone at work. Let me ask you that question. Is it good to be there at times? Some people say, oh no, I hate going to work. Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm blessed to have a job. I love coming to work most days. But even when I worked in public accounting and I worked in accounting, I enjoyed some days going to work because I got to interact with people. I got to be at times the example of Jesus to others that weren't reflecting it as well. So yes, sometimes it's even good to be at work. Or how about that other picture up there in the upper corner there, being on the beach? Who likes sitting out there in the sun with nothing to do, maybe under some palm trees, hearing that ocean and feeling that ocean breeze? It's good to be there with the sand fleas and the sand and the sunburn. And there's a reality, isn't it? That there's a lot of good things about being there. And my brother-in-law, Randy's shaking his head no. Some people don't like the beach for that very reason. It's sand, it's coarse, it's everywhere, as Anakin Skywalker would say in Star Wars. But to think about that, is it good to be there at the beach? Other people love the mountains too. The beauty of being out there and just seeing the size and enormity of some mountains and just the beauty of it being in that location. And then on the bottom center then too, some people, it's good to be with a lot of other people. You like being around other people. Extroverts love to be around other people, to be at a party and hearing all that noise. Yet other people, they say it's not good to be there. Rather, like that last picture on the bottom right corner there, it's good to be alone. It's good to be there if you're more of that introverted person. As we ask that question of ourselves today, where is it good to be in our lives, the one that's worthy to ask? And so I ask this as kind of this question today then when it talks about the presence of the Lord. Is it good to be in the presence of the Lord? Now look, I know you're all like, yes, Pastor Mark, it's good to be here. That's the church answer. Do you believe that today? And so what we want to look at today, and the sermon's purpose, not a series purpose, but as we look at the Transfiguration, it's to explore the presence of God. Look at, in this New Testament story of the Transfiguration of Jesus, to look at this in some greater detail. It's a blessing to actually be here as part of that. Now, as we look at this Transfiguration story, you need to understand that it is contained in the other synoptic gospels, those similar stories. Now, we're looking at Matthew chapter 17, but this same story is also in Mark 9 and also in Luke 9, but not in John. We're going to look at this too, that John was actually even present for this Transfiguration story we're going to look at, but it's not included in his story. But we're going to look at Matthew chapter 17. And also to know that in the New Testament letter, Peter's letter, his second letter, 2 Peter chapter 1, he talks a little about this Transfiguration too. And just to kind of give you a little background or a little upfront story about it, this is what Peter says about what happened on that day. He goes, look, for we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power. But we, meaning Peter, was an eyewitness of his majesty. He received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory saying, "This is my Son, in whom I love. With him I am well pleased." We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain. Now, the term that we're going to look at today with this transfiguration is actually a Greek term, since it's in the New Testament written in Greek. The name or that word, metamorpho, is where that metamorphosis comes from for transfiguration. It's to change form or to transform, as we look at this story today of the transfiguration or transformation of Jesus in it. And it's an important one to actually take a look at. Now, this transfiguration story, as we continue with it and look at it, to say that, here we go again with this. Jesus has already predicted his death as we get to this part right in Matthew chapter 16. So we're going to take a little bit closer look at this, but it's noticed that this happens on a mountaintop. They go up this mountain, but understand it is a disputed location. They were leaving from Caesarea Philippi and going, and they apparently go up this mountain. Where it is, does it matter? Does it matter where this mountain experience or mountaintop experience actually occurred? No, it does not. But they dispute about where it happened. You'll see more about it. It's not so much where, but it's actually what happens is the more important thing. Now, the term here is used in the Christian faith. Have you ever heard this before? You had a mountaintop experience. A lot of times it's from this story we're about to look at where people will say, I've had a mountaintop experience. And even Lori was talking about it. She was singing about that 25 hours of worship. That can be one of those mountaintop experiences for someone. And we're going to look at the story today, which is a mountaintop experience for the disciples. And I want you to consider this. As up until this climb or to this point on the mountain, understand that all of the miracles that have been seen, have happened, or that Jesus has done, was done in his human form. And if you look back over the stories here, that even before in the earlier parts of Matthew, there's the feeding of 5,000 that people clearly saw that this man Jesus had done. There's these driving out of demons that Jesus performs. There's this healing miracles that are done time and time again. And everyone sees it in the form of Jesus as a man. What we're going to see here is this transfiguration of Jesus in the story today. It's something for us to actually consider as part of all of that. So let's go back there before we get to our message today. We have a lot of pre-stuff here in advance of hearing this story, but I want to go back in Matthew 16, the chapter right before it, in verses 13 to 28 to kind of build, or as we kind of climb up to this story today. And this section here in Matthew 16, it says, look, when Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah, he says, look, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, that's the general location of where they think this kind of happened, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Great question, right? Not so much about where this mountaintop experience is, but together to focus on who is this one Jesus? Who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And then he says, but what about you? He asks, who do you say I am? For every person here today, what about you? Who do you think, or who do you say Jesus is? Now, Simon Peter answered. That's not surprising. Simon Peter often called out different things all the time. He was quick to speak. He said, look, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by the flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades or hell will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom or heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Keep it under wraps. But what a beautiful title that he gives to Peter. What a role that he gives to Peter. If we're going back to the story of dramas, the life drama that we have. But then listen to this. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed on the third day, be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord! Did I wake anybody up on that one? That was my intent. It was an exclamation point, that's why I did it. But he said, this shall never happen to you. What he's saying to Jesus. Jesus said to him, you're this rock that I want to build my church on, right? But then listen to this. Jesus turned and now says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Big change. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple, that includes us. So you may want to listen to the words of Jesus right now. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross. And let's pause there for a moment. The cross that we now, so many people wear around their necks, was not the symbol that it, is. Back then, it was a place of death and crucifixion and brutality of the Roman Empire. Jesus is bringing this in to those that are following him, who he speaks to today. Look, take up your cross and follow me. Then he goes on, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. What role you've played. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, you've just climbed up this mountain to get to the story we're going to look at today. In Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 to 13, the Transfiguration. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, so just the three of his disciples, and led them up a high mountain. Where was the mountain location? It doesn't matter. But they go up a mountain, wherever it may be, by themselves. There you go. It's not a big extroverted party scene, not the feeding of 5,000, but it's by themselves, just a few of them. There, look at this, he was transfigured before them. His face, meaning Jesus, is shone like the sun, that's bright, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Now he goes on to say, Peter said to Jesus, and this is where we get the title of today's message, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Then he goes on to say, if you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. It's good to be here. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. Scary. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. And he says one of the best lines you see over and over again in the New Testament. Jesus says to his disciples, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, where was the mountain? Doesn't matter, right? You got it. You got this, right? But they were there. Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you have seen. Seriously? All right, that's me. That's not there. That's what I would have been thinking. Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. What? The disciples asked him, why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things, but I tell you, Elijah has already come. and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wish. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. And that says in verse 10 to close this out. Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. I mean, just look back a couple chapters. What happened to John the Baptist? Matthew chapter 14, he loses his head. Matthew is beheaded. Not Matthew, but it's actually John the Baptist that is beheaded. And it's just interesting to see that is part of this story as they're trying to connect what they actually saw here. And he's saying this is how they treated him. And so the suffering, which he's already predicted there in 16, kind of starts to be even more brought forward in chapter 17. But it was good, was it not, for them to be here? But here's an interesting thing. When we get to this part of the story about the Transfiguration, many people think this is the focus, and that Jesus gets so bright like the sun, the cloud of heaven, the Shekinah glory of God comes down, and it's just this crazy scene. But understand that, and a lot of the commentaries, and it's very enlightening to think about, the more miraculous thing is, look at the life of Jesus, his 33 years. And this is one of the few moments this happens to him. But this is who he is. This is the revealed glory of who Jesus really is, meaning it's a surprise that he doesn't walk around all the time being bright and the sun being so just shining on him and everyone's just blown away. But what is the reaction of the disciples when they see this happen? What do? They're terrified. And they fall down. And Jesus has to raise them up and says, don't be afraid. In other words, in his state of who he really is, the people couldn't have handled it. But in that flesh, in that human form, is Jesus who feeds the 5,000. It's Jesus who calls his disciples. It's Jesus who takes the time to drive out demons. It's Jesus who's healing people in that human form. But the reality of who he is the glorified state from God, which, by the way, God's very pleased in the form of who he is. But the way that it's brought out here, it's like some sort of surprise thing of Jesus. Reality is that is who Jesus is all the time. He's just covered in this sense so that people aren't so afraid of who he is. And then it goes on to say, because it's not just Jesus that happens to appear here, we see, or this transformed state. All of a sudden, we see Moses and we see Elijah, 3 of them up there talking. And we heard in one of the other Gospels, they're talking about what is to happen to Jesus as far as his crucifixion and how he's going to be handed over there in Jerusalem. But it's interesting as we get this. We get a representation of what's before or with Jesus. It's the law of God. Often the law of God is given or through Moses. It's not surprising then that before them is Moses, the representation of law. And then Elijah, the prophet. One of the prophets is there. And you think about the culmination of the Old Testament laws in which you're to live. Then the prophets, you look at the scriptures in the Old Testament, it's this constant trying to live out the law. And the people are failing and going up and down with their disobedience. The kingdom breaks in half in the Old Testament. It's because they're being disobedient to the law of God. And constantly the prophets were called down to earth and tell them the message of what? Return to God, return to me. And this struggle that happens all throughout the Old Testament of the law of the Lord and the prophet's message to them. Here standing with Jesus is the law and all the prophets. It's the sum of the Old Testament revelation meets with Jesus. This culmination that's actually there with Jesus. All of God in its totality is all there together. And so important to understand the revelation in this moment is the building up of what we've seen over those hundreds of years in the Old Testament. But then Peter, it's good to be here. I mean, right? Peter says a good thing here, doesn't he? He's like, man, to be in the presence of the Lord. Everything you got going on right now. This morning, I just shared this as a sidebar. I didn't share this in the first message. I got everything ready to go. I got my bag. I got my bottle of the water here in my hand, and I'm ready to walk out the door, and I got my slippery jacket on, and this thing goes swoop right out, falls on the floor, the lid opens up, and spills the entire content of this cup, which is mixed a little bit with cranberry juice, all over the floor. That's not good to be here. And my wife says, go ahead, go, I'll take care of it. Man, what a great wife, right? And she cleans it up for me. But in that context of this, it's good to be here in the presence of the Lord. He had it right. But then he goes on and continues, hey, I got an idea. Let's build a shelter. We're going to build this outdoor tabernacle, kind of like what they did in the Feast of Tabernacle. And we'll build a shelter for, yes, you, Jesus, but one for Moses and also one for Elijah. And look, he speaks. And for one like myself, words just come out constantly. Growing up, my nickname was Motor Mouth Mark, if you didn't know that. And there were times that I would be driving up to college with my twin brother, and I'd be just talking and going and things coming out, and my brother was just sitting there, a twin brother of mine. He's just driving there, and eventually he'd just go, Mark, would you just shut up? Oh, okay. And what we have here in this moment is that Peter is, yes, it's good to be here, and he's right to say that, but he goes on and starts talking about this tabernacle when all of a sudden God just speaks over him. Says, silence, Peter, let it go. Peter knows it's good, but misses the revelation and the mistake that he makes here. Hey, this is the same guy in which Jesus is going to do what? Build his church on. This is the rock. So even though he makes a mistake here, let's remember who this guy is. And it's through him that Christ is going to work, even in his brokenness. But he is being corrected here. And here's a question. Is it good to be corrected? You don't like being corrected. I said this at the first service. No one likes to be told they're doing something wrong. If you're married, you hear this from your spouse. You're not doing that right. No one likes to be corrected. But this is what happens to Peter here. He's corrected from the Lord, and he's silenced by what he's just kind of shouting out here. I think he recognizes it's good to be there, but what he wants to do relative to it was not right. And God had a bigger plan to reveal something much greater. And here's the gospel reality of this bright cloud covering this voice from the cloud, the Shekinah glory of God that we read about in the Old Testament is shining down, and this voice, which is God saying, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." There's nothing better here. You want 3 words after all my verbal diarrhea today to remember from what the scriptures say here. Listen to Jesus. As a follower of him, listen to him. One of the greatest gospel realities of what's portrayed here is, look, all the things that you've seen, the culmination of everything, it'll all go away. Listen to him, my son, whom I am well pleased with. It's summed up in that gospel reality. Now, here's a great quote from Charles Spurgeon, a pastor who's speaking on this transfiguration story. He says that often we get confused about what it is we're to worship or to follow. Is it Moses? Is it Elijah? Is it my pastor? Oh, I love my pastor. I'm going to follow him. And yet, Spurgeon says it like this. If Peter, the guy who shouts out there, be our master, let us call him so. But is Peter our master? No. But then he says, if Calvin, that's John Calvin and Calvinism, is he our master? Let us call him so. And if Wesley, John Wesley, a founder of the Methodist Church, says, if he be our master, let us call him so. But, I love the word but. My family picked on me the last time I said it. He goes, I love but. That didn't sound good. But this word here, but, single T, if we are disciples of Jesus, and if you're a follower of him, then let us follow him with other men, meaning who you listen to, only so far as we perceive that they follow Jesus or follow Christ. Let Christ always be our example that we look to or from in the way we should live our lives in Christ. And what's your response to this message today as you look at it? When you look at Matthew 17, verses 6 to 8, look, when the disciples heard this, meaning this is my son whom I love, with him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came, touched them, said, get up. And then he says those words, don't be afraid. But then look at this. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. No one else. It's Jesus and Jesus alone. Evaluate your response today if you call yourself a follower of Jesus. and your obedience to it? Is it good to be here in the presence of God? Is it good to recognize that our focus should be on Jesus? And as God called to all of us, listen to him. Listen to him. Now, I want you to think about this then, too. This is one of the things that I kind of came to me as a revelation, at least I'll call it as that. I'm putting together this message, and it's a standalone. I use these backgrounds, as you know, for the messages, and the first image was a darker picture, almost like rainbow-like, but the three presence of people there. When I put this image up and lighten it so that you could see the words today, who disappeared? There's three people that are present there. The center one is usually just, is represented as who? Jesus. And I thought, whoa, there's a revelation for you to think about. How often in our lives we replace or remove Jesus out of everything in our equation when he should be the one we listen to. The one. He's the one we're to listen to. And so then I went on and I typed in Transfiguration. You can do this too if you want to. Not now on your smartphones when you get home or some other time. Transfiguration of Jesus. And even though we're told here who's left all alone at the end of this amazing event, who is it? It's Jesus, right? Every picture you see of the Transfiguration is always three images. Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. And there's just a sample of it when I looked at the images when I put it in. Yet the real message of the Transfiguration is what? Listen to Jesus. Listen to him and to him alone. So I want to close with this today. In my studies of this, I came across it. Look, when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus. It is significant that their entire focus was forced upon Jesus once again. The cloud was gone, Moses had left, and Elijah had disappeared. But it might also have been good. It's good to be here, right? Let's talk about this. It might have been good also that after the events of the Transfiguration, no one remained from the disciples. When the experience was over, there would have been no Moses, no Elijah, and no Jesus. Listen to this. This is exactly the experience of many believers today. They have some spiritual experience. They go somewhere on the mountaintop and they experience God. And when they come down, it seems like there's nothing left. They receive some ministry from the Holy Spirit of God. But when it is over, it's over, done and gone. Nothing remains. That's not what we're called here to focus on. Not that they all disappear. It may have been good also that after the events of the Transfiguration, only Moses remained for the disciples. Theoretically, when the experience was over, there would have only been Moses. Though Moses was a great man compared to Jesus, he was like the moon is to the sun, just a reflection. It would be sad to exchange the grace and truth that came by Jesus for the law. How are you doing in your obedience to the law that came by Moses? We saw how it played out in the entirety of the Old Testament. Not well. But there are those sad ones who see Moses and his law only. Focus on the obedience. Miss out on the grace and mercy of the Lord. It might have also been good that after the events of the Transfiguration, only Elijah remained for the disciples. Theoretically, when the experience was over, there would have been only Elijah. Elijah was a man great for the power of his word and the boldness of his national reforms. Isn't that something that we all hear about right now? All the reforms that are happening in our nation. Yet all this doesn't compare to the person and work of Jesus only. It might have also been good that after the events of the Transfiguration, all three remained. That's what you see when you see pictures up there. At first, this might have seemed to be the best. Why not all three? Isn't that what Peter was at? Let's build a tabernacle for all three of them. They should all be here. This is good. Yet now that Jesus has come, Moses, that's the law, and Elijah can fade into, look at this, their supportive roles and never be put on the same level as Jesus. Though the apostles saw Jesus only, they saw quite sufficient for Jesus is enough for time and eternity, enough to live by, enough to die by. Is it good to be here? Is it good to be here in the presence of God? Is it good to be here on earth? Is it? When pain happens in your life? When you're off the mountain? Because when they come down this mountain, they run into a demon-possessed boy that none of the disciples could get rid of. This is what happened as they come down. It doesn't work out well for them. Is it good to be in the presence of the Lord when things in your life aren't going well? Is it hard to come to church when you're living in sin, when you're living in your brokenness? Is it good to be here in the presence of the Lord when things don't seem to be forming or going the way you want it to? Is it good to be in the presence of the Lord? Look, as a Peter, as a motor mouth Mark who speaks out of turn sometimes, I got to share a story from yesterday. My mother-in-law is in the hospital right now. She has the flu, which has been going around, but she's been living at Providence Place, assisted living place before, but she's being asked to be removed. But the family found out only through the doctor notes, and the doctor shared with my mother-in-law that she needs to be removed out of Providence Place. And it was kind of hurtful that no one from the home called to speak to my wife about what was going to happen. The doctor told my mother-in-law not the best way for her to find out, not the best way for my wife and the family to find out that she's got to go somewhere else. There's no place for her any longer. Is it good to be here when you hear that kind of news? That's a sad way to end the message. Until I want to share something with you. Yesterday, when we're moving the stuff out of Providence Place, and my brother-in-law, we were the ones moving the chairs, right, Randy, moving all the junk, running into things, at least I was, I'm just terrible with that kind of stuff, loading up his truck, loading up the cars. The director of nursing came to my wife, and I thought with the injustice that kind of happened and the anger that can build in your life, in the presence of all that I saw, I got to witness my wife give grace to them. And I thought, wow. Her focus could have been on what you would consider to be an injustice. You ever get something happen to you that you don't like? It's not good to be in the presence of something wrong, an injustice when you think your life is being screwed up or messed with, and you want to fight back. And there was, in this situation, the director of nursing talking to my wife, and I got to witness her sharing grace instead. That's transformative. That's transfigured behavior for people on this earth. Because we're used to, when something goes wrong, with customer service, you let them have it. But I, like Peter, didn't have to share a word yesterday. I was just moving stuff. But I got to witness my wife share the grace of God with somebody else. They didn't deserve it. That's listening to Jesus. That's listening to as disciples of Jesus. Listen to him. Because even when it's not good, or you don't think it's good to be here, he may put something in your life where you can flip it and make it good to be there. It's transformative. It's transfigurative in your life to live for him. People of God, it's good to be here. It's good to live for Jesus, to put in the role of love and grace and forgiveness. Let us pray. And as we hear the sirens go off here at the fire station today, we're also going to pray for the needs there as well. So, Father, we right now hear the calls of the sirens to know that there is a family somewhere in need, great trouble. And maybe right now, Lord, they're not believing there's anything good that's happening in this situation with someone in need, maybe from an accident or family emergency. Lord, we pray that your presence would be there, that in the midst of everything else that's going on, that you alone would be there for the family to focus on. And it's a message for us today as well, isn't it? It's good to be here. It's good to be in your presence today, oh Lord. Whether everything in our world is going well. Maybe for some of us, it's the apples rolling off our head and down into the sound pitch, as we talk about as a metaphor today. What do we do